pleasant day, everyone. I would like to thank PAFTA Region 5 for inviting me to this conference to talk about something important, timely, and relevant, something that will help us determine the future and trajectory of teaching and learning in the Philippines and beyond. According to the World Health Organization, as of April 2022, there have been 3,683,865 confirmed cases of COVID-19 reported to WHO. And as of April 6, 2022, a total of 143,751,270 vaccine doses have been administered. These numbers represent a lot of things. They represent the lives we lost, the opportunities we missed, the fragility of our systems and practices, and the overwhelming social inequalities and inequities. Right now, I am sure that we are all growing tired and exasperated whenever the conversation shifts to the discussion of the COVID-19 pandemic, especially how it affected and changed learning and instruction. However, no matter how tired we are with this topic, the fact remains that the pandemic transformed education beyond recognition, and it resulted to us standing in a shaky and stable ground. Looking back, the only certainty in education right now is that we can never go back to how education was before. The only option for us now is to embrace what we currently have and use it to move forward. The ramifications of the pandemic are things that we no longer need to be concerned about. Our concern today is to construct pathway to recovery. Constructing this pathway to recovery requires us to be innovative and imaginative because it entails using educational tools, practices, and other approaches to education that are alien to us. It means that we have to reinvent everything we know about education. It means that we have to start from scratch and build post-pandemic education ex nihilo. To construct this pathway to education recovery, we need to understand the present condition of education. We need to ask ourselves what changed and remains the same. Education, as we know, heavily depends on the presence of the traditional classroom where you have a number of students listening and participating to the lectures and activities prepared by the teacher. The blackboard and chalk are our mouthpiece, and we are accustomed to this learning setup that we are unable to deviate from it and explore. But the arrival of the pandemic showed us the exact opposite. COVID-19 showed us that learning is in fact not confined in the four corners of the classroom. It showed us that learning can take place everywhere, even if it's in tough environments such as virtual spaces. This realization that learning can take place anywhere is the most important and significant gift that we have received from these unprecedented times. This realization has inspired us to apply and adopt new strategies. We have started to integrate information communications technology by familiarizing ourselves with learning management systems and other online platforms. We have shifted our strategies from strictly face-to-face to synchronous and asynchronous modalities. We also started to become more mindful of the different contexts and conditions that our students are exposed to by providing them modular learning, allowing us to lay down the foundation to achieving an accessible and inclusive education for all. Indeed, all things have enabled us to cope with the changing and evolving landscape of education, an education landscape that is erratic, changing, volatile, and ambiguous. Dear guests and participants, we are now equipped with skills, knowledge, and attitudes that can help us transition to a different form of education. But we can only achieve our goals if we share the same framework and standards that could help and guide us towards recovery. The topic of my message today focuses on reinventing pedagogical approaches in challenging and difficult learning environments. How can we reinvent pedagogy within the limits of challenging and difficult learning environments? Is a question that we need to ask ourselves, and we don't need to look anywhere else to find the answers. In the Philippine Normal University, we have developed the Kaway Aralan sa Bagong Kadawian. This is a system-wide shift triggered by the pandemic with the intention of making the delivery accessible and inclusive for all. Across system, approximately 8,000 students and faculty members have joined the implementation of Kaway Aralan, our own flexible learning program. In 2021, the implementation was strengthened considering the feedback of the faculty and students in the Term 1 implementation and as revealed by the monitoring and evaluation team of the program. Right now, we are working on institutionalizing its brand of flexible or blended learning based on the results of our monitoring and evaluation. Despite some items for improvement, the innovations made in the delivery of the PNU curricula can be viewed as generally well received by faculty and students. The Kaway Aralan framework is sustainable, but still requires new programs and policies that should be designed to further elevate the quality and effectiveness of its implementation and to further ascertain that the framework is responsive to the unique needs and conditions of our students in the current time. Instruction is generally delivered effectively as observed from the pedagogical and assessment practices reported by both faculty and students and from the reported satisfaction of many students. The university should provide more comprehensive training for faculty to enrich their pedagogical and assessment competencies for flexible learning delivery. While there are perceived limitations in terms of features, the EPNU, or the Learning Management System of the university, is instrumental in facilitating flexible learning delivery of undergraduate and graduate courses in PNU Manila. Faculty members and students need instructional support to address barriers that cut across technological, social, and psychological dimensions. Institutional support to promote the physical and psychological well-being of faculty, staff, and students should be reinforced. The enablers of flexible learning delivery, such as strengthening the policies and guidelines of synchronous and asynchronous classes, wellness break, and other institutional support mechanisms in order to attain optimal learning among students should be sustained and further consolidated. Before I continue, I would like to share with you this short video.
One thing that I hope that we can remember is the freedom of what is possible when you open up your mind to what learning can look like, right? When we don't think of learning as a thing that has to happen in a school or has to happen in a classroom, or we don't think about learning that even if it's delivered by a webcam, it has to be delivered from a teacher directly to a student, right? When we instead think about learning as something that can emerge from the current conversations that are out there in the world, or can take place whether it's in a living room or whether it's on a sidewalk or in a park. So during that first week, I tried to think a lot about, well, what do my children need to know about the world? So for example, my son's worksheets were mostly, doing sums and things, so we didn't find that terribly interesting. And so instead we would think about, well, if we want to explore multiplication, for example, how could we do that in a compelling or an interesting way? One example of an activity that we did was, at the time, the coronavirus was still pretty new, and one of the hypotheses was that it was an exponential spread. And so I started teaching my son about this, and I asked him, hey, if we tried to figure out how many days would it take for 1 million people to be infected by the coronavirus, if the number of people infected doubles every day, how many days would that take? It's kind of a morbid question in some ways, but it was a topic that was really, really important to him. And he was able to figure out how many days it would take for 1 million people to become infected. And that led him to become really surprised at how it started slow, but then it grew really, really fast. And so we started to, well, how long would it take for everybody in the United States to be infected? How long would it take for everybody in the world? And this kind of led to an additional set of questions that he could explore that were letting him use mathematics to answer something he genuinely cared about. I had that opportunity because I happened to be on spring break that week. Most parents were still having to work every day, all day, right? And sometimes in multiple jobs. So this was not an equitable situation at all. It was an opportunity that happened because I had the privilege to let it happen. The inequities that emerge from doing fully online learning are quite vast. And even if you have an internet connection, if you live in a small apartment, it's really impossible to find a quiet place to have those meetings and to have those conversations. And I think we should consider that as we think about, well, should we expand these kinds of technologies? Should we expand these kinds of learning opportunities? We can do that, but we need to do it in a way that leverages the affordances of the medium, and we need to understand that when we do that, we're not actually addressing issues of inequity that are systemic in our educational systems. Despite the fact that it was overwhelming, and despite the fact that the amount of time that my wife and I had to sort of devote to what our kids were thinking about and doing during the day before school kind of returned in this online form, the space of possibilities of what they could explore was wide open. The space of possibilities of how they could explore it was also wide open. We could come up with all sorts of crazy, interesting ideas for activities that the kids could do, or conversations they could have, or projects that they could make. And I think we actually had a really exciting opportunity to try that out at the beginning of this pandemic, and we saw little flashes of that in individual families or in individual pods or in maybe some communities. But the nature of the crisis that we were all facing, the nature of the balancing of work and home life that was really impossible for most families across the world, and the fact that school has a tough time of thinking of learning beyond the usual resources that we find in classrooms or school buildings, that all kind of reasserted itself. And so what we're left with when we think about online learning or remote learning is something that resembles a great deal kind of the more traditional classrooms that we find well before the pandemic, and unfortunately will probably return in full force once school returns after this is over. That's what I want us to remember, that learning isn't dictated exactly by the nature of a classroom or the nature of a school. It can be so much more than that.
I want to re-echo the statement of Professor Nathan Hallberg in the video. In the post-pandemic learning environment, the space of possibilities of what they could explore is wide open. We could come up with all sorts of crazy, interesting ideas for activities that the kids could do, the conversations they could have, or projects they could make. This statement clearly expresses the possibilities and opportunities available to us, and we can make it a reality if we know how we can navigate the uncertainties of the post-pandemic education. I believe that the Philippine Professional Standards for Teachers, commonly known as PPST, can provide us the framework to ground our new pedagogical approaches. The PPST is designed to set out clear expectations of teachers along well-defined career stages of professional development from beginning to distinguished practice, encourages teachers to actively embrace a continuing effort in attaining proficiency, and to apply a uniform measure to assess teacher performance, identify needs, and provide support for professional development. The PPST is a tangible expression of our desire to improve and elevate the quality of Filipino teachers. I firmly believe that quality education is anchored on how teachers perform inside the classroom, whether it's in the traditional sense or in the high-flex modality. As teachers, school leaders, researchers, and policymakers, it is crucial that we design our post-pandemic pedagogical approaches based on 4 important things. First, establishing a safe and secure learning environment to enhance learning through the consistent implementation of policies, guidelines, and procedures. Students learn and retain knowledge when they feel safe, engaged, connected, and supported. These temperaments of learning contribute to how learners progress academically and socially. Second, adapting and implementing learning programs that ensure relevance and responsiveness to the needs of our learners. Collating this information will help us to design pedagogical practices that are uniquely contextualized and responsive to the needs of the learners. This profile of learners will also allow us to adjust and retrofit our pedagogical approaches when the need arises. Third, supporting learning environments that nurture and inspire learners to participate, cooperate, and collaborate in continued learning. A supportive learning environment promotes a balanced and harmonious relationship among learners, where the teacher facilitates delivery of instruction and learning tasks through valuing every learner's potentials in a classroom free of distraction or interruption. And fourth, managing classroom structure to engage learners individually or in group, in meaningful exploration, discovery, and hands-on activities with a range of physical learning environments. This necessitates us to restructure learning environments for it to become more conducive, participative, and appropriate for the activities intended for the students. Spaces for learning should inspire curiosity and wonder, not intimidation and fear. In addition to the 4 points I mentioned, I would like to add one more. And this is not explicitly included in the PPST or in any directives or policies. To truly reinvent our pedagogical approaches in these challenging and difficult times, we need to reinvent ourselves first. We need to reinvent how we, as teachers and leaders in education, approach education. This entails unlearning everything that we previously know and embrace innovation and change. We need to recognize that we are no longer at the front and center of education because in the new teaching modalities that we're going to adopt soon, it is in the needs and conditions of our students that reign supreme. The pandemic has clearly shown us that teaching is never about us. It is always about our learners. The challenges and difficulties we encountered as we shift to the new learning environment was rooted in the fact that our approach to instruction was always a one-way process, never dialogical. But because of the pandemic, we learned to truly listen to our students, and in doing so, we discovered how to deliver instruction in ways that we never thought is possible. We learned how to include our students in making decisions about the delivery and mode of instruction. We started to listen slowly and all at once. That realization might not be accepted by everyone in the field, but that is the truth. To reinvent education is to overhaul our systems and processes, and it all starts in reimagining our role inside the classroom. My dear STEAM colleagues and partners in education, all the technology and resources that we need to thrive and guarantee the continuity of education is already at our hands. All we have to do is to use them well and use them to our advantage. And most importantly, we need to include our students in designing responsive pedagogical approaches that can withstand the challenges and difficulties of the uncertainties and ambiguities of the new and emerging learning environments. Thank you, and have a pleasant day ahead.